Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, and regulatory landscape and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Adetola Popoola, Data Privacy Counsel at Apple Bank, as well as Jonathan Samon, Chief Privacy Officer of Apple Bank. And we have Benjamin Pearl, Seton University Law School alumni. We're here to discuss the legal landscape of data privacy and cybersecurity, including the key regulations shaping compliance, risk management, and enforcement trends. It is great to have all of you with us. The Seton Hall crew, which I am currently in school and a member of for data privacy and cyber law. It's an interesting environment, Abby, and we know that the legal landscape is constantly evolving. It is a very dynamic space right now. What are some of the things that you're looking at? What are some of the trends that are shaping it?
So with the fast-paced environment that we're in data privacy, you always have to pay attention to what's going on in the legislature from various states. Being in the United States is a very fragmented regulatory system for data privacy. There's no comprehensive national law, it's state by state, so you have to constantly monitor what's going on in each state and to also assess your exposure to each state.
Yeah, and Jonathan, that really is the challenge, whether you're talking about data and cyber law or other areas of law, because of the multiple jurisdictions that we have in the US. And oh, by the way, if you're a company that operates globally, then you have all the other jurisdictions that you need to be aligned with as well.
Sure, of course. The most well-known is the GDPR in the EU, but virtually every country out there, every major country, Canada, China, Brazil, India, they're promulgating their own privacy laws and cybersecurity laws, and if you're an international company operating there, it's incumbent upon you to honor those laws and comply with them.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, Benjamin, is the way that the US fundamentally approaches privacy is very different than other areas of the world. So for example, we're constantly compared to the EU, but the way they approach privacy is very different. So for that reason, to have a cohesive, standardized set of framework is a challenge.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us that talk about opt-in versus opt-out, it's a big difference in thought. When you think of principles-based or framework-based or standards-based, there is a patchwork of different standards promulgated throughout the world, and I think different institutions, highly regulated institutions, or different jurisdictions will choose which one is kind of leading the pack, and it will be dynamic as we kind of go through this journey.
And that's another layer of complexity that you add on when you're working for heavily regulated industries such as healthcare, such as financial services. You have to adhere to those agencies and those regulatory bodies as well.
Absolutely. So if what was talked about with GDPR or CCPA or LGBT or LGBD for Brazil, my apology, then you add HIPAA and then you add GLBA and you add a lot of variants, you have to stay on top to what was alluded before in terms of reg tracking or legislative history or any essential information and intelligence that you can stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, and Adi, I think another part of the challenge is too, good actors and bad actors are leveraging the same types of emerging technologies. So it's almost like you're playing 4D chess and the regulatory environment can only catch up so quick.
Yeah, so that's kind of how the game is played now. It's a cat and mouse. As regulations come out in the private sector, you have to try to abide by it, but you're always chasing behind the bad actors, as you say, because they're also looking for new innovative ways to get around controls that you put in place to be compliant with regulations.
Yeah, so for example, the emerging technologies in AI that we're using, they're employing the same thing, and by the way, they're very well funded when you have nation state actors.
Yes, that's kind of the playing field now, because in the past you were used to dealing with just private groups, but now that like you said, they're state funded, so their access to technology is exponential compared to what you were dealing with in the past.
Yeah, and it's not even like you're being extorted for money anymore, Jonathan. It's about the data. I mean, the data is the commodity, and that's what they're going after.
Sure, the data is the new oil, as many have said before, and it is incredibly valuable and every sector, every business has financial services, social media, technology, communications companies. There's just so much there and so much that malicious actors can take and profit from.
Right, and of course every industry now is a tech company. And there's no escaping it, especially with the AI, from small enterprise to large enterprise, really changing the strategy and the models of companies.
Yeah, I mean, it seems if you have a website or an app, you're a technology company, and everyone does now. And what comes with that are cybersecurity threats, cybersecurity vulnerabilities through your day-to-day activities.
And that's a great point, Benjamin, that Jonathan brings up, because the bigger the tech stack gets, right, the more vendors that you're working with, that opens you up to more vulnerabilities.
Yes, to add on to what you alluded to with AI, I kind of put on my logical AI governance hat. Whether you're big, medium, or small, mid-cap, or large cap, you have to build an effective program to assess and understand where those vulnerabilities may reside and where those threat actors will proliferate within your ecosystem.
Yeah, and the other challenging part too, when you think about cybersecurity, with the whole tech stack, you have different business lines that are competing for the same resources. So it's a matter of being able to communicate this and understanding who your audience is, whether it's senior leadership, whether you're talking to the board, whether you're working internally with your teams. You have to be able to communicate and compete for those resources, because there's an intangible cost that comes with a company's trust. There's no value you can put on that.
Absolutely, and I think what's happening more and more when there are boards, risk boards, audit boards, governance boards, someone on the board will say, well, I've heard that my client or my colleague is dealing with certain cyber issues or AI issues or risks that are prevalent. What are you doing? And it makes it even more challenging for you to parlay those resources and determine where you're going to get the best benefit or the best strategic value.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, right? Different sizes of companies, different verticals you're in, the type of data that you're protecting. And another challenge with that is companies still operate in silos. And it's hard to get that risk management view.
Yeah, so, assessing a risk internally, kind of the biggest step you have to take is knowing exactly what you have, where you keep it, and how you're using it. It's essential because you can't boil the ocean once you encounter this. So you have to actually take a strategic approach in dealing with it, figuring out what's most important to you, and also what's most important for your brand, and protect it as you go along that way.
And I'm glad you brought that up, and I want to talk about strategy for a moment here, because to your point, it could be like drinking from a fire hose when an incident occurs. Not only do you have to think about it from a brand perspective, you're responsible to reporting to your board, the regulators, your clients, and so forth. So it's not like you put a strategy in place and walk away from it. It's almost like a fire drill. You have to practice this because the environment is evolving at the same time.
Yeah, so I mean, it's as you spoke before too, with the bad actors being so advanced, your strategy has to keep adapting, because what you did last year could have changed due to a regulatory change or to an advancement in technology that now gives the bad actors a leg up against you.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jonathan, think about it this way. We really weren't talking about generative AI till November 2022 when it became part of the consumer vernacular. That's a little bit different from the training that you have been exposed to, because it brings in another element of technology, not only from the client perspective, but internal, watching the sensitivities that are going into these platforms and so forth.
Absolutely, it's such a dynamic space. AI is the top flight headline these days, and that'll be displaced before long by something else, quantum computing, and all of the threats that arise from there. So it is challenging and equally exciting, trying to, from an internal and defensive position, or even go on offense to stay on top of these.
And what's concerning to me is the landscape is incredibly competitive, especially in financial services. So there's this rush to get internal and external facing products out there so that you're able to tell that within your brand story. My concern is the cyber risk and data governance, is that a forethought or an afterthought? I don't think we've had enough time or a benchmark to see what those implications are.
It should be a forethought, and I think you're seeing that more and more, that it is not an after-the-fact consideration, because once you get to market with a product or a service or a business, you're vulnerable. So we talk about privacy by design, security by design, incorporating that all at the outset, so that it's built in and as sustainable and scalable as possible.
Right, and I'm sure, Benjamin, with your practice and when you're hearing about these tech stacks wanting to grow and get these products to market, sometimes you don't have to bring something to market if there's no problem to solve. And sometimes tech resources just kind of go to waste.
I agree. I think because AI is newfound glory, November 22nd, the ability to foresee AI in your crystal ball, or foresee parties, third, fourth, fifth parties from a tech perspective. I think data management or master data management was easier back in the day because you contained your own data. Now with third, fourth, fifth cloud parties, now you really don't have a foreseeable vision at first glance, and you have to be very proactive. And I think the risks, the pervasive risk with cyber, with data breaches, whatever proliferates, is something that we need to be a watchful eye upon.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we need to recognize as well, implementing a sustainable compliance strategy, just because there's not a regulatory framework in place is not an excuse. There is some framework, and you're always going to have to comply, whether it's a person or an AI mechanism that's making the decisions or making the mistakes. You also don't want to hinder innovation because you're afraid to move ahead without a framework.
No, but also the good thing is from a compliance or attestation perspective, I think more and more people want a trusted service criteria, want a seal of approval that denotes that someone has looked at it with the proper diligence and signed off on it appropriately for public view, that gives confidence to users, to investors, to consumers whatsoever.
Which is interesting, Adi, when you think about the reporting structure, is it the traditional compliance side in financial services, or is this the CISO's responsibility, or are we still trying to figure out what that framework could look like?
So in this field, it's kind of a balance of multiple, because you also have to throw in the technological side also, because you're not only dealing with regulations as they're coming up, and you can't just focus on we need to comply and deal with the compliance. You also have to discuss the controls that you put in place, because the controls are also essential to having a successful program in protecting your data and maintaining the trust of your customers. So it's a very holistic approach when you're dealing with the CISOs, the compliance team, and the tech team.
Yeah, it's also an audit and risk manager. I mean, it's probably under the CFO umbrella, for a large part anyway. So, Jonathan, when we're thinking about sustainable detection, mitigation, response strategies, how are you approaching that?
Well, we learn from what's happened before,
right.
And that's provides a good roadmap for what may come, but then there's the unexpected. So there are tabletop exercises, there are collaborative, as Adi mentioned, holistic, these cross-functional teams that bring different perspectives in, so you're not siloed and have more, including third parties, including the insurance carriers, who help bring insight from the outside world, and to better anticipate what could happen.
Yeah, and it's not like your commercial insurance covers a cyber incident. This is something completely
separate line.
A separate line, which I find interesting. It seems to be that this is one part of the organization where you have to have that holistic view in order to be able to mitigate that risk. So again, back to my original point, I'm curious to see how the revenue and product rush to market, what that's going to look like, once we understand any vulnerabilities that exist, because you also have to audit your vendors as well. So it's not just specific to what's happening within the company.
Well, absolutely. I mean, third-party service providers, vendors play a significant role for many organizations, again, across different industries, and ensuring that they're doing what they need to do through these attestations, through your own due diligence, because they could pull you into the morass of trouble. So vetting them properly externally, third parties, is just as important as your in-house.
Right, and of course, Benjamin, if there is an incident with a third party, it's your problem also. You can't just say, oh, so-and-so had an incident and it wasn't our fault. Well, that doesn't necessarily work with regulators.
No, and I think if we go back to KYC, know your customer, everything's shifting to know your vendor, KYV. And going back to the statement about third, fourth, fifth parties, or a vendor that you trust subs out the work to someone else unbeknownst to you, you need to do that diligence. You need to have that confidence, and that trusted diligence needs to be embodied in the fabric of your organization. Yeah.
In the last couple of minutes here, I want to talk about career insights for law students, or someone such as myself who is not, 1L and in my 20s anymore, because it's constantly an evolving environment, and your learning is something that is always going to evolve. And you made a great point before, Adi, that there's so many different functions that are involved in the cyber process. So you don't have to be a comp sci major, you don't have to be a math or physics whiz, thankfully. And there are so many different areas where you don't have to plug and play into a tech or security company.
Yeah. So in this field, and part of part of the biggest advantage of the legal path is you have a broad knowledge base, and your experiences also support that and builds on that foundation. So once you get in here, you realize you don't have to go the traditional legal route. You don't have to litigate this. You could actually be in a supporting role. For example, we spoke in the past on the compliance side. You could be on the tech side with a privacy perspective, and also you could also be in the privacy team itself as, you know, the DPO or the CPO, and that is all part of the data privacy ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, you could also make the argument as well, consulting firms, which I'm sure are in demand right now as we're trying to figure out what, you know, this environment is going to look like. But at the end of the day, all companies need cyber privacy attorneys, risk managers. It doesn't matter if you're working at Nasdaq or a restaurant across the street, right?
Yeah, that position exists. Chief Privacy Officer, Privacy Counsel, you're seeing it everywhere. You have seen it for some time now, everywhere. And to your point, consulting, outside attorneys, all of these outside auditing firms with the privacy expertise all play a pivotal role in bringing that direction.
And which is so interesting, Benjamin, because I feel like I know my career as an example. It doesn't necessarily go the way that you might have planned it out when you were in undergrad, as an example. I mean, I started off in institutional equity trading. Here I am as a reporter. So you could always evolve with the skill sets that you pick up along the way. I
think pivoting is key. I mean, I started at Big Four as a CPA. I never thought I'd get into technology, enterprise resource planning, GRC, and now privacy and cyber. So having that acumen, that baseline, and then building skills, getting a law degree or a master's degree specializing in jurisprudence, I think it allows you to pivot, and you can be industry agnostic. I tell students, and when I advise students, don't focus on the industry, focus on the competency and what skill sets you need to have in your arsenal.
Yeah, and there's a great point that you make, because we get this a lot when we have financial services, accounting, econ students that come to visit Nasdaq, where they're so focused on, okay, I have to go to a bank, I have to work for an asset manager, I need to get on a trading desk, when to your point, it could be industry agnostic with the skill set. Adi, if you could go back and either rewrite, or what would you advise yourself as a beginning law student, what you know now, what you would have leveraged then?
Truthfully, because when I really got into this field, I went into the consultant side. That's how I got here, and I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do anything else, because you get a full exposure to various industries, various levels, and various teams. So you have a broad base of knowledge from the consultant side, which you could get that similar experience at a big law, but I would 100% repeat that.
Yeah, I agree with you, because, you know, as a returning adult student, finishing my undergrad at 40, and then, you know, getting my grad degree, having the grad school experience before starting the program here at Seton Hall Law, just when you think about citations and how to write a paper, is huge. So I agree with you 100% there. Jonathan, if you could rewrite or you know, insert yourself in a different way, what do you think?
I think, you know, I navigated my way to the privacy and cybersecurity space later on in my career, and just the point made before about being able to pivot and change. You know, now in today's era, today's curriculum at Seton Hall and elsewhere, there's so many more courses and programs. I definitely would have taken more of those, and that's the great thing for current students, that they have that foundation. You learn a lot outside of school, but that textbook knowledge is key. Foundational for that path.
Especially with the basis of law too, it comes down to contract law and interpretation, and you know, again, back to privacy and what rights are, and so forth, and protecting those rights. And Benjamin, to wrap up with you here, how would you advise your younger self? What would you have done different, or would you have just ran with it the way you did?
I don't think I'd do anything different. I was fortunate to work for great companies, AmLaw 100 firms, Fortune 100 firms. You get a breadth of good, bad, and different experiences. You can benchmark those, and you bring them to the table to how you can advocate with your current program.
All right. My fellow pirates, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.